I'm 84, and for about 2 years after Eleanor passed, I thought I was handling things as well as a man my age could be expected to handle them. I was eating careful, resting more, keeping the windows closed in cold weather, avoiding anything that might tire me out too quickly or give me a reason to fall. My doctor ran his numbers and nodded. My son Daniel stopped calling twice a week and went back to once. I took that as a good sign. I thought, this is what responsible looks like now. I've written some of this down. It's in the Coleman Remedy book. Links in the description. But what I need to tell you today started before the book. It started in my own kitchen, with habits I never thought to question because they look too much like wisdom. There are 8 things that seniors do every single day. Careful, sensible, well-intentioned things that are quietly working against them. Not illness, not accidents, habits, the kind nobody ever names because they pass for good sense. I did every one of them, some of them for years, and nobody told me to stop. Not my doctor, not my children, not the pharmacist, nobody. If any of this sounds like your life, I want to know. Leave it in the comments. Hit subscribe if you'd like to stay. It matters to me that you're here. The morning after Eleanor's funeral, I sat down at this kitchen table and I made a decision. I would be careful. That was the word I chose. Careful. Like it was a plan. Like careful was the same thing as well. I stopped going to the workshop in the evenings because the light in there was poor, and a man alone at 81 had no business running equipment by himself after supper. Reasonable. I gave up the early morning garden routine because my knees were stiff in the cold, and the ground was wet, and I didn't see the point of crouching down in frost-wet soil when the same work could wait until 8 o'clock and my joints had warmed up. Sensible. I stopped making real meals most nights. Eleanor had cooked for us every evening for decades, and the kitchen felt wrong without her in it. And it seemed like too much trouble to boil a pot of anything for one person. So I ate soft things, soup from a can, crackers, bread from the grocery store, the white kind in the plastic sleeve that you don't have to chew very hard. Easy on the digestion, I told myself. I had a row of supplement bottles on the kitchen counter. Vitamin D, magnesium, fish oil, B12, a coenzyme something or other that Patricia had read about in an article and ordered for me without asking. I added to the row whenever I read something that seemed to apply to a man my age. I was being thorough, managing my health the way a responsible person manages things, systematically, with products and a routine. I slept more. 7 hours had always been enough for me, always. But I started staying in bed until 7:30, sometimes 8. The day had less pulling it forward without Eleanor in it. And the bed was warmer than the house in the mornings. And I told myself that rest was what the body needed at this stage of life. I watched more television than I ever had. Not because I enjoyed it. I'll be honest, I never much cared for it. But the house was very quiet. Television filled the quiet without demanding anything from me. It didn't ask me to respond, or to remember, or to care. I could sit in front of it for 2 hours, and then stand up and not be able to say what I'd watched. Twice a week I drove to the pharmacy and the grocery store and came home. That was my outing. That was my contact with the outside world. I wore a jacket in weather that didn't require one. I kept the car well under the speed limit. I came straight home. Every single choice made sense on its own. Every single one. That's the part that's hard to explain. I wasn't being reckless or lazy or foolish. I was being exactly as careful as a man is supposed to be when he's on his own at 81 and doesn't want to cause anyone trouble. I was doing what careful old men do, and I thought that was the same as doing what was right. What I didn't know, what nobody had thought to tell me, was that careful and shrinking look, almost identical from the inside, and that the slow erosion of a man doesn't announce itself. It just happens, quietly, while he's being sensible. The first thing I noticed was the stairs. Nothing dramatic, I wasn't falling, but I became aware of the banister, the fact that it was there, the fact that my hand went to it without me sending it. I'd been up and down those stairs for 15 years, and I'd never touched that banister unless I was carrying something heavy in both arms. Now I reached for it on a clear, unencumbered morning, out of habit, without thinking. I started thinking about it then. That's the thing about noticing something once. You can't unnotice it. Then came the pickle jar. I put up pickles myself the summer before Eleanor passed. Good ones, the way my mother used to make. I went to open the jar one afternoon, and my hands wouldn't do it. Not a little struggle, a real one. I wrapped a dish towel around the lid. I sat down and braced it against my body. I finally got it open, and I sat there for a moment, looking at my hands as though they belonged to someone I didn't recognize. These hands had built furniture for 30 years. They'd held Eleanor's hand through 2 cancer scares, and a surgery, and a 4-day hospital stay in 2017. They'd driven fence posts and split firewood and worked a lathe. They couldn't open a jar of pickles. That winter, I caught a cold in December, and it dragged on until February. Not a bad cold, just a slow, gray, refusing to leave cold. Eleanor would have had me on 3 things by the end of the first week. I took what was available at the drugstore, rested more than I was already resting, drank juice from concentrate, and waited. It eventually left. But I didn't feel like myself for a long time after. My granddaughter Lily called me from Sacramento in January. She was 22, finishing up her last year of college, calling to see how her grandfather was getting on. I told her about my week, the grocery run, the pharmacy, the television in the evenings, the early bedtime, the supplements on the counter. There was a silence on the line, the kind that has weight to it. Then she said very quietly, "Grandpa, that sounds like the schedule they put people on in the hospital, so they don't cause any trouble." I told her she was 22 and didn't understand. She said she probably didn't. We talked about other things, but I kept turning that sentence over for weeks afterward. I'll tell you, I have written out every one of those 8 habits in detail. The supplements I was taking that were working against each other in ways the labels don't explain. The food choices that seemed safe but were starving my muscles without me knowing it. The sleep schedule that had wandered so far from my body's actual rhythm that I was tired by 2 in the afternoon every single day. All of it is in the Coleman Remedy book. The link is in the description, with exactly what I changed, when, and what I was looking for, because I wanted to be specific enough to be useful. Eleanor always said that vague advice is just comfort in disguise, so I wrote it plain. But I want to tell you how I got there, because Lily's phone call was the first crack. And a crack is not the same as a door opening. In March, 2 months after that phone call, I found myself standing at the workshop door with the key in my hand. I don't remember deciding to go there. The television was on in the other room, and I wasn't watching it. And there was a restlessness that had been building for several days, the kind with no particular object. And when I came back to myself, I was standing at that door. I unlocked it. The smell came out first. Machine oil, wood shavings, cold air that had been sitting still for a long time. My father's workshop in Kentucky had smelled the same way. Some smells don't change, no matter how many years go by. I stood in the doorway for a moment and just breathed it. The tools were where I'd left them. Sawdust on the workbench from the last project. A small cabinet I'd started for Eleanor's sewing room the spring before she died and never finished. The unfinished cabinet was in the corner with a drop cloth over it. I didn't look at it directly. I sat down on the old stool I'd kept at that workbench for 40 years. The seat had worn smooth in the shape of me. I sat and I didn't do anything, just sat. Above the secondary bench there was a shelf. Among the things on that shelf was my father's notebook. I kept it there so I could refer to it when I was working with plants that had uses in the workshop too. I'd carried that book from house to house since 1989. I reached up and took it down. I wasn't looking for anything particular. I opened it toward the back, the way you do when you have no specific destination. My father's handwriting, small, careful, slightly slanted to the right, filled the pages in pencil. Some entries in ink for the things he considered fixed and certain. I came to a page titled, "Things That Make a Man Old Before His Time." He had written it in 1971. I was 30 years old then. He was 53. The list was 8 items long. Sitting when you should be standing. Quiet when your body needs noise and work. Soft food when your teeth are still in your head. Giving up the work your hands know how to do because you're worried about the effort. Letting other people make decisions about your own body without asking questions. Sleeping past when your body wakes you. Dropping the morning routines that tell your bones what day it is. Stopping the garden because the ground is cold. 8 things. I had read that page before. I must have. I've been through that notebook 100 times over 30 years. But I had never been ready for it the way I was ready for it on that March afternoon in the workshop, with the cold air and the smell of wood shavings and the unfinished cabinet in the corner. My daddy used to say, the costliest habit is the one you haven't examined yet. He wrote those 8 things down in 1971, and it took me 50 more years and a 22-year-old granddaughter in California to understand what he meant. I sat in that workshop until the light changed. I didn't start anything. I didn't fix anything. I just sat with the notebook open in my lap and let what was true be true. I didn't change everything at once. I want to be clear about that. That's not how it works at 84. And anyone who tells you different has never been 84. You don't read a page in a notebook and become a new man by morning. It doesn't work that way, and it probably shouldn't. But I went back to the workshop the next day, and the day after. I didn't start the cabinet right away. I wasn't ready for that yet. But I stood at the bench and picked up tools and let my hands remember what they knew. Calloused hands don't forget. They go quiet for a while, but they don't forget. I went back to the garden in April. My knees still ached in the cold. I went anyway. Slowly, the way everything is done slowly when you're doing it for the right reasons instead of the fast ones. The lavender was coming in thin on the east side. The back corner that had gone to weeds needed more mornings than I could give it all at once. I worked for 20 minutes, went inside, made my tonic, sat down. The next morning I did it again. I made biscuits from scratch one Thursday morning. My hands shook a little getting the dough together. By the time they came out of the oven, they weren't shaking anymore. I went through the supplement bottles on the counter and put more than half of them in a paper bag for the donation bin. I'm not going to tell you which ones to remove from yours. That's not my place, and it depends on the person. What I can tell you is that I sat down with my father's notebook and Eleanor's nursing journal side by side, the way she and I used to do when we were working something out together. And I looked at what I was actually putting in my body versus what my body actually needed. Those are two different lists. I'd been confusing them for 2 years. Eleanor always said, the supplement that costs you nothing in side effects is the one that grows in your backyard. She wasn't against medicine. She was a nurse for 28 years, and she had tremendous respect for what medicine could do. But she understood the difference between what was necessary and what was sold as necessary. I'd forgotten that difference for a while. I still have bad days. Days when the house is too quiet and Eleanor's chair at this table is too empty, and the morning light comes in sideways and makes everything feel like a photograph of a place I used to live. Those days don't stop. I don't expect them to. I'm not looking for those days to stop. I think the wanting her back is part of honoring what we had, and I don't intend to talk myself out of it. But I don't fill the bad days with careful nothing anymore. I've written all of it down, everything my father knew about what keeps a man standing upright and useful and alive in his own life. Everything Eleanor understood about what the body needs that doesn't come in a prescription. Everything I've worked out for myself in the years since I stopped being managed and started paying attention again. I called it the Coleman Remedy Book. The link is in the description below. It is not a medical textbook. I am not a doctor, and I never once claimed to be. And I'd be suspicious of anyone who confused an 84-year-old man with a physician. It is the record of one stubborn man who kept looking when the easier answer was to sit down and be careful. Read it the way you'd read a letter from someone who went before you on the same road and wanted to be useful. That's all it is. I'm 84. I still walk to the garden before the sun clears the ridge line. I still open the workshop most evenings. I still drink the tonic my father made from Kentucky soil before I was born. The cabinet in the corner is still unfinished. I'll get to it. Nobody ever told me to stop doing any of this. I suppose nobody thought it needed saying. Maybe that's exactly the problem.